Okay, we are
Here for both.
live on YouTube right now and now on Twitch. And Twitch is getting a solid 45 frames per second for some reason. Yes. Okay, it's up to 60. I think we're good. I think we're good.
Yeah.
Okay. If people in chats want to let me know how audio is, let me tweet about stuff. Let me grab links. You just said we're live, which is great. Helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, and then live on both YouTube and Twitch. Anyways, hi everybody. Welcome to SEAL Team 7 Revelation. We're continuing to keep on keeping on with, we'll call it theory content and discussion content. Next week's show is going to be a little bit more combat oriented and gameplay oriented. We'll have at very least BioRoxas on and possibly Blitz, who I think both have expertise in that subject. So that should be a fun time. But this one we're kind of talking about some of the deep esoteric theory stuff, and I'd like to introduce my guest today, Steed. FF Steed27 is what I know you. How would you like to be referred to?
Steed works.
Okay,
My name is kind of has some characters that are hard to pronounce for English speakers, so it's all right.
that's fine. What is your native language?
It's Arabic, so you can
Fantastic.
understand the challenge with some letters. It's
Some
not that much out there.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, Steed, um, I have been we've been aware of each other since for a year or so more. You kind of just entered hard after Rebirth, the scene, and you started making your own content, and each bit of content you've made has looked better than the last. And that's not a dig on your previous content at all. It's just it's really fun to see creators grow and stuff like that. And we'll turn you up just a little here. Okay.
Hmm.
And so you've been really killing it, I think. And uh last week I watched your latest video on some Jungian psychology, how it relates to what is meant to be the most pivotal scene in the game, of Final Fantasy VII, and certainly of the trilogy, the live stream sequence. Um, and you've also had kind of, I don't want to say it's an outlier perspective, but you've always been, we'll say, a little bit more conservative in terms of how deviant the story will be from the original, and your content has sort of been centered around, um, what is the real nature of these things, like timelines and dream worlds and stuff like that. And I've always really appreciated the perspective. um, I think a good introduction would be, how did you tell me about your first experience with Final Fantasy VII?
Yeah. That's such a, a big question. I think I mentioned, well, my name on YouTube might suggest that I was always a big FF8 fan,
Mm-hmm.
first of all. So I grew up with Final Fantasy 8. It was my first Final Fantasy. And I don't know if I should say this, like a lot of people will say, oh, well, then why are you making content about Final Fantasy 7 considering this fact? I I actually played it in different periods of my life. So it took me almost decades to finish Final Fantasy VII because, jumping back into Final Fantasy VII after being introduced through 8 was a bit of a shock graphics wise. I
Sure.
don't think it aged well even during those couple of years,
Yeah.
right? And I always got through the bomb and mission, but then something always I was missing something to get through it. So it took me. I didn't finish it when I was a kid. I finished it when I was an adult, and my experience was much different. I finished it years before the remake, a couple of years before that, and so Final Fantasy VII took so long, but then when I finished it, it started. I understood what the point of why what the fuss is about essentially. Why is
Sure.
it so big? Why is it much bigger than eight? And I started to understand the differences. And in a funny way, the remakes have. I almost started the remakes with a little bit of the perspective of a new player. So I had
Mm-hmm.
finished the game. I had done everything, but I didn't have the same amount of nostalgia. This is why I'm saying this is going to come across very weird. I didn't have the same amount of nostalgia to the OG as probably maybe yourself, right? Playing
Sure.
it 30 years earlier or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I went into it, I would like to think, with an open mind, and I absolutely loved it. So what I was looking for is, hey, I missed playing it around 97 right away. Can I get the same feeling as what people got from the remake, from the Bomb Mission, for example? And I almost had the same feeling, judging from what I see people say about the trilogy and most importantly about DOG. And I really loved that. And I was along with whatever they wanted to tell. I'm still along with whatever they want to tell. I don't want to jump ahead in the conversation, but
Yeah.
I was very much of the opinion after finishing the story that there seems to be something weird going on here, and it seems to be, and it looks like it's more than a remake. It's more than FF7. I was actually happy because I said I thought to myself, okay, we're getting Final Fantasy VII as a remake, and we're getting something more story wise. So I thought about it in a very simple terms, and I was happy. I was really going along with that. I was ready to embrace whatever defying fate meant because I didn't have something that I was clinging to that I did not want to let go.
Sure.
It's funny saying this in 2026 for me. And when I finished Rebirth, I took a year off because I wasn't able to play Rebirth for personal reasons. I was moving countries and whatnot, and I only finished it very late. So this is why I actually spawned very late in the YouTube space. By the
Mm-hmm.
way, appeared sometime around August 2025. I only finished it around holidays 24, so I finished Rebirth less than a year after it came out, and
Yeah.
I was late to the conversation. And it's funny because my very first video, this is not a sequel, like written in bold words, whatever, was was coming from a place of I wasn't even envisioning that I would be making content, to be totally honest. I just had this idea of, well, I completely changed my opinion after Rebirth. It seems like I'm personally interpreting it differently, and I don't see that as a big voice. I don't see that as something that is very popular among the community. So all the theory videos and essays that I was longing for that I watched afterwards were kind of going in opposite direction, and loved them, but I didn't find one angle that approached it differently and said, you know what, maybe this is just the same, and there is some kind of weird stuff going on. And that's how I landed on Cloud, being possibly the solution to explain this. So it was kind of trying to look for keys or solutions, and that's how I landed there. I have a little bit more of a perspective now, and we can talk about it. But this is essentially how it started, and it's kind of funny and weird because, yeah, as you can see, I didn't really start the same way as many, and even in terms of creating content. But here we are. I
Yeah.
still love it.
Absolutely. That's I think that's it's fascinating to find other perspectives because um obviously I'm a lifer, and my very first Final Fantasy was Final Fantasy. Uh and so and then I followed the, bizarre journey Square Enix had with localizing the games, and had to play uh you know uh 4, then 6, with them being called 2 and 3, and then watch that sort of come back to itself. And then I really fell in love with Final Fantasy from a non-Final Fantasy game called Secret of Mana, Seiken Densetsu 2, which was just localized to Secret of Mana in the US. And and I, even though I'd already played Final Fantasy and Final Fantasy, 4 or 2 in the US, um, I didn't have the kind of attachment to like the wonder of Square Enix and what it could do, until Secret of Mana, and then six, and then I fell in love with six. I played six after Secret of Mana, and I was like, okay, whatever they do is going to be, something I'm super interested in. Like there's this opportunity to tell stories through this medium that, I found really really interesting. And I was still too young to realize how big video games would be in that field as a form of art. And then when Final Fantasy VII came out, when it was, I saw commercials on TV, I was like, this is going to be the craziest thing anybody's ever seen. And the few friends that I played Final Fantasy with felt betrayed by it. Like they're like, I can't believe they're doing this 3D thing. I can't believe it's on PlayStation. Like, um, and but I jumped ship with it. And I'm really glad that I did. And it kind of it adjusted my whole worldview. And my experience with Final Fantasy VIII was really good too. Like, one, it was pretty soon after Final Fantasy VII compared to the way that dev cycles work now. But from the perspective of somebody that age, it still felt like an eternity. Time goes faster as you get older, sadly. And so I remember being so excited for Final Fantasy VIII, and um, you know, playing through it, and it didn't quite have the same punch, uh, in terms of like changing the way I saw things. But I've been able to revisit it and enjoyed it more, um, and then I've been loyal to the series ever since. And even when I've felt rather outspokenly that the series is faltered. uh you know
Yeah.
not everything that that has the Final Fantasy name on it is stuff that I enjoy, and that's fine. It can be, can be a bigger thing. But with um when Remake was announced, I was really surprisingly disappointed at the I was kind of disappointed with the company as it was. There was stuff going on with Final Fantasy 15 at the time that made me feel like, you know, um, Versus was lost, and I was like, what are we doing? Just remaking this game. I've always wanted to play, you know, um, a higher graphics version of Final Fantasy 7. Don't get me wrong, but um, I wasn't super excited at the prospect of it because it felt a little soulless. There's something sort of inherently, um, you know, inherently against the message of Final Fantasy VII to just milk it as a cash grab or a remaster. But when I first saw the very first trailer, I changed my mind because I saw that the gameplay had changed, and I just couldn't walk away at that point. The action combat looked so cool. I was like, you know what, fuck it, I don't care, I'm in. And then as like a ton of time went by after the first trailer, like years went by, and then wondering like, do Square games even come out anymore? What's going on? Like, I kind of felt disenfranchised again. And then I saw um the spoileriest trailer where Sephiroth is showing up, and there's weird stuff that I couldn't understand, and it really piqued my interest. And once I figured out what Remake was, part 1 was, um and like you said, more than a remake, I was like, okay, this is a conversation about what adaptation can be. And, the thought that I say all the time, almost ad nauseum, is that the only way I felt that Final Fantasy VII could really do justice to its namesake is to, um, change the conversation about how we make games. in the same way, remake that conversation, so to speak. And you described it as more than a remake, and that's one of my favorite descriptions. Um, for this particular brand of adaptation, and we'll get into labels later, things like sequel and reimagining and spicy remake and all that stuff. But more than a remake is something that uh, Sephiroth's Japanese VA Morikawa in the Material Ultimania for remake, the RMU, um, says he says, when I first got to see this project and see that it was much more than a remake, I got so excited. And that's been my experience too. I'm really excited to see that this is more than a remake. And um so let's talk about Revelation now. Revelation is revealed. It's the revelation happened, and the uh, trailers came out, and I asked everybody that's on the show, what was your impression of the Revelation reveal?
Yeah. I think I said this on stream before. It's again, it's such a big thing to talk about. Just the feeling and everything we got out from the first watch. Um, if I was to summarize it to, I feel like a lot of people have talked about the same things. There is one thing that really stood out to me, and this is really, I'm trying not to be biased, but it's how OG coded the trailer looked. Um, I'll just put an example is the character avatars, which people have later linked to the original artwork from Nomura, for example, on the menu. How much it is focused on the core story of the OG. How I like to phrase it this way: if you took this trailer and you showed it to Sebi Webs or anyone who doesn't like the remake, or anyone
Mm-hmm.
for that matter who has played the OG, who and you erase their memory from anything related to remake, they would probably think that this is just a great adaptation in remake graphics or in modern graphics of the OG. They wouldn't really get the hint that there's anything wrong with Dream Worlds or with
Yep.
Zach or with whatever, right? I was watching your talk with Night Sky Prince recently, and you mentioned that there's like a one shot with whispers and Aerith's flowers or whatever, and that you don't get any hints about anything else going on. And I also thought about it in the sense of, so I heard the word, it was a safe trailer. I think it was much more of a game-in trailer than the
Mm-hmm.
Rebirth teaser, for example.
Yeah.
Something that is very open to the gaming community. If you want to make Final Fantasy VII bigger, putting it at the end of Summer Games Fest and having 3 trailers, 12 or 15 minutes of talk about it, and just showcasing gameplay, showcasing traversal through the high wind, showcasing all these cool features was a pretty big moment, I feel, for the marketing journey or whatever of the trilogy. So I think it will be looked back on as a big moment for part three if it's a success, and I hope it is, and I think it's going to be a success. The other thing is, I also felt that it works well almost as a standalone story. And I don't know if this is what they're going for, because they said, we want you to have played Remake and Rebirth before going into Revelation. I do remember Hamaguchi saying that recently. But the teaser, the way the introduction was made, the telling us that meteor is already in the sky, the world is about to be destroyed, introducing some characters here and there. I feel that if you show this trailer to someone who does not know Final Fantasy VII at all, hasn't played Remake or Rebirth or DOG, they would be intrigued by the plot right away. It's very catchy as an idea. The world is about to be destroyed. There is a counter because a meteor is looming over the planet, and it seemed as though we already jumped to the moment meteor has been summoned. So this is why a lot of
Yeah.
people are talking about, are we going to get those two parallel timelines running along each other? So the northern crater portion and the Junon escape, are we going to be jumping back and forth, or is the Junon escape actually going to happen first from a player perspective, obviously not within the events of the game? So it seemed as though Yeah, you. That's the impression I get, is that you could show this to anyone and tell them this is Final Fantasy VII,
Yeah.
and they would be, if they don't know the story at all, they would be intrigued and would be like, oh well, I'm intrigued. I might start it, or I might even go and play the first two. Or if they haven't played the remakes but do know the OG, they would be like, well, this looks like a very faithful adaptation. What are you guys talking about? Why are you even talking about a sequel angle or whatever? It's kind of, it's a funny place to be in, really.
Yeah, I do find that to be the general strategy is one, they're trying. I think there is a little bit of saying, hey, uh, we might not deviate too much. Like don't worry about missing things that you love. Um, but I think one of the most interesting things about Final Fantasy VII in particular is, and this is colloquial. This is my experience. I would like to say that I have like a fairly solid fandom finger on the pulse, like, and that I've talked to probably more casual fans of Final Fantasy VII than, most of the human population, most of the gaming population. Because I'm very curious about how people perceive Final Fantasy VII, and people's memory from the water burial to Safer Sephiroth is astonishingly murky as to how the actual story unfolds, you know, um, and most people up to this point uh, of the story, if they are, really familiar with the layout of Final Fantasy VII, have already completed Wutai, right? They've already done whatever's happening in Wutai. And so what their memory of is really like save for Sephiroth and the goddamn weapons. And so they showed off weapons, and I think that was really important, showing off weapons. Some people remember the Junon prison scene, but like everything else people are so like collectively unsure about. And 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 one of the wildest things is how often I've talked to a casual people that like I'll be like, well, what about the scene in Cloud's mind, where we find out what really happened to Sephiroth? They're like, oh yeah, I remember that. I'm like, what? Oh yeah, you remember that? You remember the climax of the game? What are you doing? And so I do think that there's this strange job that part 3 has to not only deliver on the conversation that the developers have had with things like the unknown journey, the ways that it has deviated, because it has, these new elements, whether we want to call them timelines or dream worlds or dream timelines, how we both like kind of resolve that and remind like a good percentage of the population that the story kind of started after Aerith died, not the other way around,
Yeah.
like, and so I think I was surprised that we did. In one way, I was surprised that we, didn't see a little bit more story beats in the first trailer. But in another, I completely understand it, and I really do think it boils down to audience, and that they just chose, um, they chose the to show off jumping out of the high wind and new gameplay and how fun it's gonna be to play as Vincent, and Sid, because this is a video game at a video game show, and the video game part is pretty important. Um, and I'm somebody that probably would have lost interest in whatever they're doing with the story had the video game parts of remake and rebirth not been good. So yeah,
Yeah.
I kind of agree overall though with your take, is that yeah, they were pretty safe.
Yeah.
They did try and maybe address like this idea that has gotten more popular, at least in the last 8 months or so, because of a certain sect of people who's made it their life, to inform us of this, that despite whatever happens in on the back end, whatever the unknown parts of this journey is, we want you to know the known parts are still going to be there. Like,
Yeah.
we don't think that you're going to miss out on that. And they were really clear right off the bat. Like, there's one thing that's not going to be there, and it's the thing that you all, I know, are going to ride over, but Bone Village is not there, and I'm so sorry. It's just not there. And and I'm glad they got that out of the way, because if we were gonna filter a fan at Bone Village, I don't want them in the fandom anyways, so that's fine. Okay, so
That's fair.
the great answer, great response. Of course, after a trailer drop and a title announcement, we then got 900 interviews, and Hamaguchi has single-handedly taken the reins on these interviews. He is not, it seems like
Yeah.
nobody else is talking about it. And there does seem to be a collective, you know, or like a concerted effort to, we'll say, clarify and distance, potentially competing dev statements, and put them
Yeah.
all under one unified, like the director. And of course, the most controversial one, for I think a good portion of the fandom, was when he clarified to Hayes, on our PG site, that uh, I do not believe that we have legitimately confirmed whether this leads to Advent Children. And
Yeah.
of course, we both know that Katase, the brand manager for Final Fantasy, nearing his retirement, has said many things that sort of indicate that it links to Advent Children.
Yeah.
And so this could be as simple as a misunderstanding of what link could mean. Or it could just be that,
Yeah.
like, Hamaguchi is just trying, like, look, don't listen to those other guys. I'm the captain now. This is the kind of experience we want. What was your take, particularly on that? And then I've got before you get too far, there was another dev quote that you sort of had a response to, that I think finally uh, made you feel like a true compatriot of mine. So we'll start with this one.
Oh my God. I think I know what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
I think I know where you're leaning. So with the first one, I'm still kind of lost. So I have a couple of hypotheses, but I'm still kind of lost as to what exactly happened. I don't think we will ever know exactly why he said those words that way until we obviously play the game.
Mm-hmm.
My first instinct was there are two layers of translation. I always try to go back to translation whenever I'm kind of lost in these things, just because I know how much of a factor it can be.
Yeah.
There is a layer of translation from Kitase's words to the English we got, and there is a layer of translation from that question from the interviewer to Hamaguchi, and then from Hamaguchi to the as an answer. So there are possibly two or three layers of translation. I don't know if it's going to be the same person. Probably it is. But not to get too technical, my first instinct was, okay, maybe this is what is happening here. Maybe the word that was conveyed to Hamaguchi in the question is not exactly the one that Kitase used. And to avoid kind of going and confirming something that they don't want to confirm, he just kind of deflected in a way. The other one was, does he not even know the interview? And I almost instantly shut it down in my mind, because I just thought about it for so long, and I realized there is no way he doesn't know the interview happened, or those words were famously interpreted in different ways a lot within the fandom. So I I might be wrong, but I don't see a world where Hamaguchi does not know that Kitase said those words. Maybe he doesn't get the exact same version of words or of the interview, but I think at the very least he's aware of that. And so the last one is he intentionally trying to set expectations straight once again? And funny enough, this might look a bit suspicious because I also thought about the possibility of, did they see interpretations within the fandom going in a way where they don't want to see that, in the sense that are they thinking that we are not approaching the trilogy the way they wanted us to approach it anymore after Rebirth? So is this an attempt to get us back on board to where they really want us to be, in the sense of, if you compare where we were at the end of Remake and at the end of Rebirth, I don't know how you think about it, but it is dramatically different, I feel. I feel that people still think that there is enough to suggest the story will end differently or is going in a different direction at least, and I can empathize and understand that. But the amount of predictions that we had before Rebirth, myself included in my mind, because I was not really putting out content, but it was really all over the place. We thought that this story would go so off the rails that someone like Zach, for example, would take the majority of screen time, and Cloud would be, I don't know, maybe relegated to us. I know some people thought this way. I haven't personally, but if you think about where we were and where we are now, I think our perception has shifted a lot as a fandom. And the easiest way, or the most logical explanation for me, is probably what you touched on, which is, I think it's just him trying to set the record straight in terms of expectations and bring us back to a state of, we don't know where this is going. Now, did they see something that is dangerously close to the real direction of the story, so they want to lose us? I don't necessarily think that's the case, although we might be tempted to think that. But I don't think anyone has figured out where the story is going, to be totally honest with you. But there seems to be this intention to lose us once again. And my God, that Advent Children is not canon to the remake series is probably the best sentence you can put out to again lose the fandom. So it's because we think we know, or we take some things for granted. The best thing you can do in order to lose us is to actually question the things we are convinced about, or position them in a way that can be interpreted in different ways, which Hamaguchi is absolutely brilliant at. And that line about Advent Children not being canon yet to the remake series is just masterfully executed. I know it's interpreted differently. I personally have problems with the usage of the word canon, because this means that it's almost not official. This is how I understand it. I'm not an English native speaker, but I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, and someone in the chat as well. I almost understand it as, this is not officially connected to Advent Children yet.
Yeah.
And so I have, yeah.
Well, okay. So canon is a silly word because it's something taken from, me and Prof's field of expertise, which is theology, right? So
Yeah,
it's very specifically liturgical, and so it's just been adapted. And the problem with definition is that it's descriptive and not prescriptive, and so a lot of people use the words a lot of way. And how something is defined is its most common usage, and there's a lot of fringes, to common usage that sometimes muddy those waters. And so I think that really the most, from what I've talked to, like with say Turquoise Hammer and other people that are more tapped into Japanese language and culture, what we're really talking about is something closer to continuity, right? So that it's something like a continuity, which is the way that most of us would in the West would describe the word timeline of all things.
Yeah.
But to say that we're already past the point where, for instance, Dirge, if we're going back to Deep Ground, we've already been to Deep Ground maybe a little too much for us to be in the Dirge continuity. Like there's enough deviation so that we can say that all of the compilation has been adapted far enough away from the original continuity that we're now in our own thing. And so I don't think anybody's going to be disagreeing that we're all in our own thing. The main thing anybody really cares about is how much is it deviating? Am I still going to get my stuff? And is the stuff that we're going to get on top of it going to collectively ruin my experience of the OG? That's what most people are really afraid of, and that's what really drives a lot of the conversation. And
Yeah.
and there's a bunch of the deep fandom is more concerned about that than I think casuals are, because a lot of people have spent 30 years of their lives defending one outcome or interpretation, like, and so their identity is really tied to it. And so a victory for their enemy, is a loss for them. And
Yeah.
that does come up, and I hate to say that that comes up, and that does bring me to the next thing, which is um and this is where I was like, you're my brother. um is you mentioned that as it happens, the game is about Cloud, Strife. He's the
Yeah.
main character of the game. And so ultimately, whatever happens in terms of, let's say, the live stream sequence, um, it's
Yeah.
about him. And, people have been very particular about stuff. And I think it's fine to want, a specific set of scenes to come out. But he said that something happened. Hamaguchi said this, and I'm not actually sure. My read initially wasn't that this was actually part of the live stream sequence, but he said that there's a scene where Cloud realizes the truth about Aerith and Zack, um, which makes him cry every time he watches it,
Yeah.
and so what I think a lot of people read that as is, oh, well, now the live stream sequence is going to include him understanding the truth about these characters, because how else does it make sense, that he feels that he goes through the live stream sequence, realizes who he truly is, realizes what really happened, and then doesn't have a moment to realize, oh, my best friend died, and oh, uh, you know, um, I've been I've been huffing, live stream copium fumes about Aerith being alive, like, or whatever's actually happening there. If there's some other thing, like, like there's a layer of the live stream that was broken off by, Sephiroth destroying, meddling with time, or if it's just that somehow, like, Shinra's own usage of Mako has created these errant worlds. Whatever it is, like, regardless, that's an unresolved set of feelings that gave Hamaguchi, the chills 44 times. Having that not be in the live stream sequence does seem like it's, it creates bizarre pacing issues. And so you made a tweet saying, hey, like, listen, this is about Cloud. We don't have to be so precious, about this if
Yeah.
if this comes out. And that's something that I really agree with you on, and something that you got astonishing levels of hate, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a bit funny because there are obviously multiple sides in the fandom, people who cling to certain things. I feel like you will probably understand where I come from. I feel like the one thing I relate to the most when it comes to Final Fantasy VII is Cloud's journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, having talked to you and listened to what you say, it's more of the same. And there are people who don't relate to Cloud's journey is the number one thing for them in Final Fantasy VII. There are people who relate maybe to Cloud's relationship with Tifa, or Cloud's relationship with Aerith, or people who relate to Sephiroth's arc as a villain. There are so many different ways and connections that people have with Final Fantasy VII. It so happens that for me personally, it is about Cloud, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've been exposed to backlash or sort of feedback from all sides, and particularly a couple of sides which tend to relate to specific things that I don't relate as strongly to, right? Be
Sure.
in case in point, the relationships dynamics and whatever. And so the reason I say it's funny is because this is kind of the opposite of some, I'm not going to say backlash once again, but some of the feedback that I got about a year ago after my first video, where it seems to not resonate well with another side, and that creates another kind of disappointment at losing something that we hold so dear and cling to in the trilogy as it relates to the OG, as you said. And so this was just a mirror of that. It was just the opposite. And the context of it is always about, can the live stream sequence be bigger? It is. So for example, what I said word for word is the live stream sequence is about Cloud, not Tifa, nor Zack, nor Aerith. In a vacuum, probably something like that is, you could put a case of, well, Tifa does play a pretty big role in the live stream sequence, so you can't just discard that and say the live stream sequence is not about her. And you could also argue possibly that her climaxes and her arc is possibly the live stream sequence, so that there is no issue with that. The context is, can we have more in the live stream sequence or not? And within that context, considering that for me it's about the truth for Cloud and his identity. And by the way, I think what got us to think about this is that Hamaguchi said Cloud realizes something about his identity and how it relates to Zack and Aerith. So this is why a lot of us jumped to, okay, this is probably the live stream sequence or close, whereabouts. And within this context, I did not see it completely outlandish that you could set up a live stream sequence. Well, we say live stream sequence. Is it even going to be the same kind of live stream sequence now, with all the dream world stuff, with realizing Aerith is dead, with Zack probably plays a much bigger role and so on? But can you insert some stuff there? So Landy Lodge, which is a creator that I really love his content as well, speaks a lot about Cloud's mother as well, which I think is a bit overlooked, because Cloud does not entirely deny the death of his mother. So let's be objective about it. But he did not really grieve his mother, if we are being technical about it. So it happened so fast, and then all of a sudden he's going to the Nibelheim reactor and so on, and we all know what happened. But in reality, Cloud did not get to experience proper grief and letting go of his mother, and letting go of the possibility or the inability to save her as well, because there is a case to be made that Cloud was actually at home. It is not clear, but there is a case to be made that Cloud was spending the night at home, depending on how you interpret certain events. And so if you insert so my question to the fandom is, would we be against Cloud really coming to terms with the death of his mother as an addition to the live stream sequence? Let's forget about Zack and Aerith. Would that really be an issue for anyone? And my gut feeling is that I don't think anyone would really mind it if that's the case. I don't think anyone would stand here and say, no, the live stream sequence cannot be about Cloud's mother. We should not see him grieve her and whatever. And so just like that, if we then don't have an issue with Cloud's mother appearing there and all the whole sequence, what stops us from opening it to other characters who relate very strongly or very closely to Cloud's journey, as Hamaguchi himself said, right?
Yeah.
The other angle to it is, in the OG, if you think about the Northern Crater in Nibelheim, in the Nibelheim flashback, Sephiroth. So essentially, what Sephiroth's plan is he wants Cloud to give him the black materia, right? If we boil it down to the most simple aspect of it. And so the way he makes sure that happens, this is how I interpret it, is that he breaks Cloud down by challenging his sense of reality, right? And Cloud's sense of reality was clinging on the fact that he was a soldier, blah, blah, blah. And so when it was challenged in the sense that maybe he was not in Nibelheim, he essentially lost himself and he gave in, right? He accepted that maybe he was just a copy. Today, that's the way the OG solved that issue of how does Cloud give in to Sephiroth. Now, this could still be the way the remake does it. I'm not saying there is just one way to do it. What I'm offering is that currently, Cloud's sense of reality has another layer to it, which is that Aerith was saved, supposedly. So another tool or device for Sephiroth to break Cloud's sense of reality is showing him that Aerith was not saved. and that Aerith is effectively dead. So if you do bring that event there in the Northern Crater, in the Whirlwind Maze, then it is not impossible that it takes a place alongside the Nibelheim flashback, and it needs to be resolved by the time we get to the live stream sequence. Not sure
Sure.
what you see what I mean, but right, they are taking the Nibelheim flashback, but they've added other layers which seem to be critical to Cloud's sense of reality. And so seeing them added on is, for me, it wouldn't be an issue. And I think you said it before, there are specific moments in the live stream sequence which will be preserved and are very precious to the developers themselves, especially as it pertains to Cloud and Tifa's memories as kids and just how it all unfolds. Um, but the question I would like to offer once again to all of us is, how do you solve the issue of him having to reconcile his version of events with the truth about the fates of Zack and Aerith if it doesn't happen before the live stream sequence ends? So you could resolve that in the Northern Crater. You could resolve that anytime between that and the end of the live stream sequence. But if Cloud emerges out of Mideel and he still doesn't realize that Aerith is dead, that is a big problem. I don't know how you pull that off.
It is a big one. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we've spoken about this before, I believe, in one of your streams, which is how does the live stream sequence even happen, right? And what does it look like? Do we get multiple flashbacks within the story? Does Cloud fall into the live stream twice? I don't think it's completely outlandish, maybe to suggest something like that. Do we only get the live stream sequence right before the final battle? I don't know if we how far we need to go with our imagination. From the Revelation trailer, it seems to be very much following in the footsteps of the OG. So I don't know if the Cloud we saw in the gameplay in Mideel is fully healed Cloud. It seems to track in that sense. But how do you solve the conundrum of Zack and Aerith's fate and without including them somewhere around the live stream sequence is where I don't have a good answer. I think they might fake us out, but I don't know how you solve that. This is why I offered that solution to begin with.
I'm in the same boat. It is, I think, the biggest issue. And I mean, yeah, and I've said this on pretty much every stream that it's the thing I'm most worried about. Just because the live stream sequence had the value of being in the final 3/4 spot of the game, like in the place where you put a climax, in a story. That's where the live stream sequence was. In this standalone game, we're in a different issue. Okay, so um, we're at we've been making good time, and you've been doing a great job. Um, so I guess we'll just get into timelines. Okay, so I
Yeah.
know you've probably been you started your first video with "This is not a sequel," and so there's
Yeah.
and I've always been, I want to say, sympathetic to people that use that moniker. And I'm defensive of people that are uh, are reading the game uh, as there being some kind of, we'll say it, canonical tie between the canon OG, continuity and this adapted continuity. Do
Yeah.
you have, so I've seen you kind of break down some logical issues with that, but logic aside, um, what is your takeaway on how, based on what's been presented so far, the canon of remake series connects to the OG?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, is whether it references it, which is, again, been going back and forth about that. And to go back to my first video, actually thinking about it now, and you said that kind of I tried to improve going forward afterwards, but it tackled the question of whether this is not a sequel or not. But the the solution offered was, hey, it's probably just Cloud being the delusional and seeing things, and this is probably the reality of it. So it was kind of here and there. It was between two things which were not necessarily independent, but yeah,
Right.
I feel like maybe separating them might have made more sense. But I still, I'm still very grateful that I was able to put my ideas that way. Um, I think and my last video might be a good place to start when it comes to this, and I know you've reacted to it, so you will know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It's almost as though I start to realize that, are we asking the wrong question
Yeah.
of, is there right, does it reference it, does the remake series reference the OG? Is that a question that is conceptually even valid within the existence of remake and OG as two
Mm.
separate things that are entirely independent? Can we even find a connection between the two, or is the remake? Can you essentially take the remake series and replace the OG as if it never existed, and still get a logical, coherent version of events and continuity and whatnot? And I don't know if that is actually the case. I tend to lean a bit more towards, you can probably override the OG when it comes to what the story is trying to tell, and you would show a newcomer the remake from A to Z, and they wouldn't need to touch the OG, is where I tend to lean a bit more. So this would seem to suggest that the remake series ends the same way, which is again semantics. Just like we say sequel is a problem of definition, there is a problem in terms of definition of saying this will end the same way, because that is such a broad term to say, or word or sentence to say. But I actually thought a lot about this yesterday, and I would like to maybe pick your brain as well on this, because
Sure.
for me, we have been talking about, yeah, we have been talking about, will the ending change, right? This is the core question. Does it reference the OG, and does the ending change? And I sat down and I thought about, what do we even mean by the ending? Because Advent Children is a symptom of people not wanting the story to go to the same direction. People hate Advent Children. Some people hate Advent Children for what it is, for the quality of the writing, for a lot of other things. But when it comes to the plot, Advent Children is just used as the poster for the direction of the OG. Because technically, even the visions we got while fighting the Harbinger were not technically from the time span of Advent Children. They were shown in the movie, but those are all events from the end of the OG, right? Technically, you could argue that. So, what is the true ending of Final Fantasy VII for me? You remove even everything within the compilation. The final ending of Final Fantasy VII is essentially the 500-year flash forward scene with Nanaki. So, I think that's where it all ends. You could say that that is the ending of the story. And so everything leading to it could be changed while we still land on the 500-year flash forward. And would we define that as the same ending or not? You see what I mean? It is a very hard question to even define what the same ending is and what a new ending would mean. Because we could have different events that still lead to that flash forward, and people would sit here and argue, well, we got the same ending because we have the 500 flash. Sorry, I keep this sentence is always something that challenges me. 500-year flash forward scene that we get with Nanaki. I'm just going to call it the Nanaki scene from now onwards. And the message that that scene tries to convey is that if we presume that the laughter is supposed to represent children, if we presume that the smoke is supposed to represent the fact that humanity survived and that they learned to live and be one with the planet, then the question becomes, is this a good or a bad ending? And um, I sat down and thought a little bit more about that, and I realized, do we need to even care about whether humanity survived or not? And I know it's such a big, such a loaded question, but does a good ending actually relate to the fates of the characters we have spent a lot of time with more than humanity as a whole? So essentially, if they pull off an ending where they tell us that Cloud has had a great life and that he has healed from everything, that Aerith and Zack, for example, have returned peacefully to the live stream, and that whatever, you could imagine,
Hmm.
do we then actually care about whether humanity survived 500 years in the future? Do people, how strongly do we cling to that as an ending? Um, all of this is just to say that the concept of changing the ending is so abstract and so hard to even define, um, that I don't even know what a new ending would look like, right? Which I am aware is not helpful in the context of the question. So let me then go back to narratively what it means. So the one I'm really curious to understand what people think about is, um, something like Geostigma, for example. Let's imagine that people don't like Geostigma, and so this is why the remake exists, is just to remove Geostigma, right? So this is the new ending. There is no Geostigma. I believe that the Geostigma being introduced in the story is not something that can just be discarded without repercussions or without consequences. This is the problem I have with suggesting that we can get all the way to one specific event and then what that event changes and then all of a sudden we have something new. The reason being that Geostigma, you could argue, is the way that the plot or that the story has used to convey to you that humans have learned their lesson in a way. If you read On the Way to a Smile, there is a case to be made that the live stream erupting to the surface served as a reminder to humanity to not mess with the planet anymore because they don't want to go down that path anymore. And so if you remove the live stream erupting to the surface and you remove Geostigma and you remove how much humanity suffers for a while, there's nothing to suggest that humanity gets wiped out by Geostigma in Advent Children and Dirge of Cerberus, I believe. But if you remove that suffering, what stops Rufus from reinstating Shinra, for example? Right? Just a question. Because Rufus has this story in On the Way to a Smile. Again, I'm aware this is a bit long, but he kind of understands that Shinra is not the way to go forward, and he even has a bit of an idea from someone to build something stronger than Soldier, and he actually refuses and has that person killed. So it's implied that he has that person killed because he doesn't want to go down that path anymore because he saw it firsthand and he experienced it firsthand. So if we get somewhere different by removing certain pieces of the puzzle, how do you make sure that narratively the story is still sound and tight? Because humanity learning its lesson was, I believe, linked to that, right? So this is the question I would like to offer for if we presume that we can get some sort of different ending when it comes to technical stuff like Geostigma, livestream erupting, and so on.
Okay, I want to address a couple things that came up in comments. Um, uh, One, Toolman is reminding us, and this, and I agree with this. I think you could maybe make a assertion that that geostigma is somehow a lesson, uh, a narrative lesson, but it is definitely not one from the planet. It is literally Sephiroth's will lingering, and it is
Yeah,
it's malice and intention, and yeah, a lot of kids die, um, and but this isn't a fairy tale, for sure. As far as
yeah,
as but I hear what you're saying as far as Rufus getting geostigma and it being part of his character development. I love Rufus as a character, I really do, and I would sack his entire character development if it serves the greater narrative, though. Like, I don't care. Like, they just do something else with him. And so I'm not super
yeah,
like attached to that. And I also want to just sort of like I want to bring in, so I love the compilation novels, and I think there's a way to appreciate those. But I also wanted to get into the concept of authorship here. Like, what are everybody's roles, and who makes narrative decisions, and because a lot of people were like, well, we get into this all the time, like Dev said, and there's somebody that's collecting all the times the devs have said it's not going to change, and of course, you know uh of course you could probably do the same on the other side if you had the energy. I don't. I like reading all the dev comments, but it seems to me like there's been this really consistent, like, play the game and find out. There's really no promises. It's an
yeah.
unknown journey. The game itself is the strongest message, blah, blah, blah. Um, but something that I want to just address about Nojima's job isn't necessarily to determine how things go. His job in general, you know, with exception of his own, you know, specific stories, is he's given story beats and he has to make them work. He has to make them logical. He
Yeah.
has to make them consistent. So, you know, what Nojima generally does is he takes the ideas of the people pushing the narrative forward, like directorial and production staff, and you know, sometimes surprising people are responsible for elements of the story. Like Toriyama has a lot more influence over a lot of sequences than I think a lot of people recognize, uh, and so Nojima is just kind of the guy that puts all that together, right? And then he gets free reign to, you know, make backstory stuff, you know, in On the Way to a Smile and Turk's Side Story, which is part of On the Way to a Smile, and then all of the remake series literature, you know, where we get really cool backstory. And he is so good at that. He is so good at that. But ultimately, you know,
Yeah.
it's kind of up to Hamaguchi, Katase, and Nomura, you know, to just
Yeah.
decide, hey, this is where things are going, make it work, uh, Nojima. And I don't think that, you know, we're going to be discounting, you know, the things that happen in On the Way to a Smile or the Turk Side Story, because we're getting characters from there. But again, they're weaved in a way that like is really centered around making the remake project work logistically. And I know people are really attached to some things, but I think that ultimately the decisions they make regarding what things are canon, you know, and what things are in this continuity, really their goal is to make Final Fantasy VII R the definitive Final Fantasy VII experience.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's why I've always been my favorite term for this is adaptation. Still, I think that's the best way to describe this project is it's an adaptation of Final Fantasy VII. And because adaptation has a really wide berth. I, for instance, just saw, and I'm not going to talk about it at all, um, the Odyssey, Nolan's Odyssey, which is really reminded me a lot of Final Fantasy VII R, and I'm not going to talk about why, but in terms of an adaptation, you know, and how adaptation can be this opportunity for the developers to have a conversation with, you know, its audience, and I think a lot of that is happening here. You know, and so I don't want to say, oh, you know, like the entire series of On the Way to a Smile and Advent Children are now invalid because there's a chance that the adaptation of Final Fantasy VII FF7R might reference it in a way that invalidates it chronologically. You know, I'm not going to say that
Yeah.
that it's thereby artistically invalid, but I do think it is. We're now in this position where it seems pretty clear that they have this choice to change the nature of Final Fantasy VII R to include elements that will logically eradicate, like Dirge of Cerberus, for instance. Like if like it, we're probably fighting Genesis. Let's be super real. We're probably going to see Genesis. We're probably fighting Genesis. Hamaguchi had that really cagey answer to, is Genesis showing up? He's like, you'll just have to wait and see. You know, like he didn't say that.
Yeah.
He didn't say, oh, not the. He could have easily said no, and the correct answer would have been no if he's not there. You know, like, and so it's really clear that Dirge, which is predicated upon On the Way to a Smile, Advent Children, um, is now
Yeah.
getting referenced in this way that is no longer, you know, adhering to this strict, straight line to Advent Children. You know, so um,
Yeah.
and would you be, and as far as the ending goes, like, uh, you know, the ending of the OG is always gonna be like the hardest thing to adapt to 7R because Advent Children existed, because we immediately have
Yeah.
this you know you know, this spoiler on the fate of things, Like in the OG's ending was so beautifully vague and kind of haunting and sent this strong message. How do you have that message now? And so it's the other
Yeah.
big problem for me. Like the live stream sequence showing up in the first third of the game is one big pacing problem for me. The other is, how do you make the ending have a strong impact? Um, so bouncing off of that, uh, something that I keep mentioning, and you've had a little back and forth, and you've just kind of like you've been needling it. What do you think about Sephiroth this time? Okay, so Sephiroth this time, and we've got Fungi Film Reviews, Journey Across the Web in YouTube chat going wild, and there's always been, like, since the very beginning. Like, I actually have a post from 2020 going, are they pushing a Sephiroth redemption arc? There's always been
Yeah.
speculation like maybe that's what's going on here. But I've very much moved away as more developer statements have come out, and as we've seen more of, like, once Rebirth came out, I was like, oh, that ship sailed for me personally. But what we are seeing is that Sephiroth's getting a huge upgrade, like just in terms of not
Yeah.
only his backstory, but like his motivation, his complexity as a villain, you know, um, everything down to two armed safer Sephiroth, like uh, which I think is very significant. And I retweeted it earlier today, but there's that. I mean, like, the way he toys with the party is so interesting, and it is so divine. Like the fact we even he grabs a whisper, has it touch, a proto relic, which then turns into Gilgamesh that we fight, and Gilgamesh immediately uh, calls him a curl, like recognizes that this is an evil divine power source. So he's getting an upgrade. Is the only purpose of this upgrade in your mind just to help us relate to the villain or drive the plot forward, or is there something more to what's happening with his character that you think lends maybe to a different ending, um or lends to this project hitting in a different way? Take it away.
Yeah. Yeah. I do want to start by being a little bit cynical about Sephiroth's appearances, and I don't want to do that, but I have to in the first part in remake, which is they had to have Sephiroth there, right? And Kitase spoke about it. So you can't have us play even through Midgar, and Sephiroth is not supposed to appear there without having him in the remake series. So they were clear on that, and I think I don't actually know what the reaction would have been if we didn't have him. Um, but from the moment they decided Sephiroth had to appear in remake, they had to make him bigger in a lot of ways, because you you're essentially creating an arc for him which didn't exist, which is his arc the from chapter 2 to chapter 18. So all of that didn't exist, well, except maybe the stuff in the Shinra building. And so one reason is, as I say, the fact that they wanted to add him. So they were forced into making him bigger. Now I feel like, and you speak about, yeah, this is the direction, and maybe can we get the writers to find a solution for it, as you mentioned earlier, and this is probably what they landed on is, well, in this case, considering he appears earlier, this is what Sephiroth becomes. He is pulling the strings from even earlier. He knows more. He is even more cryptic, whatever. Um, I do think that it's possible for Sephiroth to actually have an awareness of the future, and I don't see it impossible for the story to wrap up in a way where it's only Sephiroth and Aerith who actually have all of that awareness and end up moving chess pieces and so on around the board, and so it all unfolds without anyone else knowing as much as Sephiroth and Aerith do. So I think that's entirely possible. I don't think the story is only about Sephiroth versus Aerith, as you might have already guessed by what I said before. But in terms of what the story is setting up for him personally, with Ever Crisis, the first soldier, with we haven't had really a chance to empathize with Sephiroth in the trilogy. Correct me if I'm wrong. Off the top of my head, I don't really remember any moment where it's like even the party recognizing that Sephiroth was. It might have happened in part 3. It's not impossible. We have Glenn in the picture, for example. But I feel the setup is much more for a realization from both Sephiroth and for everyone around him of why he became what he became, rather than actually changing him for changing how he behaves towards the end. Because there are a few reasons why I think you don't redeem him altogether. The first one is that he's just done so much that I don't know if you find a way for people to forgive everything he's done and be fine with it, right? Maybe in a very naive way, I'm saying it, but Burn in Nibelheim, Tifa has a direct connection to Sephiroth in terms of how much she lost thanks to him. Cloud, obviously, even Barrett has seen what Sephiroth has been doing. Aerith literally lost her life on the hands of Sephiroth. Well, Sephiroth, Jenova, depending on how you interpret it. So I feel that Sephiroth is so far ahead or off that bringing him all together to the other side is a very difficult job. And if you were going to do that, then you would have shown a lot more in Rebirth to suggest that things are much more gray than black and white for Sephiroth specifically. But the more the story went, the more he seemed to actually fall in the black side of things. The Edge of Creation, for example, being a good case where Rebirth Edge of Creation Sephiroth has nothing to do with remake Edge of Creation Sephiroth. That it's virtually not the same character. He's so aggressive towards Cloud. He calls him my weak little puppet, Rage my weak little puppet. So it's a completely different attitude. So I don't know if you show him in a completely different light in part 3 where you justify a redemption. I do believe that you set it up in a way where we all realize that he was just unfortunately driven by circumstances, just the way he was, I guess say constructed, but yeah, the way he was made, more or less. I think what Ever Crisis or what the First Soldier adds is just how little of a choice he had, despite thinking that he has a choice. How much his life was directed by Jenova, how much even getting the Masamune ended up having him under Genova's control for his entire life. The Nibelheim event in the Nibelheim incident in Rebirth does a great job to portray a Sephiroth who is already feeling that something's wrong by the time he reaches the village, for example. Why am I laughing? Blah blah blah, and then he has the glitch and so on. So it's really painting the picture of someone that we need to free from Genova's control. And this is what I presented or what I offered in the video, which is, can we free Sephiroth and understand him in a way where we can't forgive him altogether, but we can't at the same time just hold him as the only person behind this. And there is even subtext within Cosmo Canyon NPC dialogue where one person says, it is not ourselves or each other that we need to fear. It is that which comes from without that is the real threat. So it's kind of dialogue right next to when you meet Bugenhagen. And I found that very interesting because it seems to point to who is the bigger threat to the planet. And it seems to be Jenova as offered by this interpretation more than Sephiroth. And so we just need to help him and help him seems too big of a word, but to kind of release him from that control that Jenova has over him. And so that's why Safer Sephiroth, as painted by Nomura or as drawn by Nomura, seemed to me to be a bit tragic in a way. Maybe this is why he says it's different. I don't think it's going to boil down only to that. But this is how I interpreted it. Now, when it comes to the timelines and the knowledge and merging worlds and so on, I don't know how much of this will hold true, but I believe that the world we're currently in is somewhat already under the control of Sephiroth even before the remake starts. The reason I'm saying that is because we see the Whispers acting in ways where they are possibly corrupted by the Purple Whisper a couple of times in the remake events. We see that Sephiroth is maybe orchestrating things through Jenova first before actually gaining control by himself. So there is this worlds that mirror each other. I'm not sure how if you've seen that too, right? It seems that we get this mirroring perspective or image in a lot of stuff. The last one being the Edge of Creation skyline,
Yeah.
where it seems that we are getting that mirrored, right, in Revelation. And I've been thinking about are there two worlds that kind of mirror each other, and the world where we are currently is the black side of the world. I don't even know how to conceptualize that, but there is a veil within the black live stream that is kind of enveloping reality as people perceive it within this world. And the objective is to eventually purify that and get us back to the mirror world, which would be the world where the planet survives and so on. This, of course, would presume that we are the fate we are defying is just that of the planet, which I'm aware is not necessarily popular among everyone. But if we follow that logic, this is how I would understand it: is that we were on the way that Sephiroth wanted it to be on, and what we are trying to do is just break out from that. And we can expand more on this, of course, because I know it goes into a lot of different directions.
Yeah. Well,
I see that people are just still going on about Dirge, which I don't have a good idea to your question, by the way, on whether Dirge would be undone altogether, but I just see that it's such a big point.
it is a big point. It's, I don't want to say it's distracting, but it is, a lot of, I think a lot of people are, see the identity of the project as an opportunity to correct the mistakes of the last, few of the compilation, uh, and to some extent, I agree that it's already done that, but and we could branch in a lot of directions, but we are at the hour and 17-minute mark, which means I do want to start opening up for questions. And then I have a question for you. So I do want to get into Stamp before we get into Q&A. We've had a lot of, I think, back and forth about what Stamp means. So just give me your elevator pitch for what you think Stamp means, what each stamp means. Um, what's the deal with Refu? Why is our
Yeah.
first canonical view of Beagle Stamp in the first soldier segment of Ever Crisis? Just maybe talk about that as a topic, because it's very clear that like, right off the bat, that was one of the most important things that they introduced to the Final
Yeah.
Fantasy VII remake thing. Like, it's something Nojima in particular is very proud of. Like, he was like,
Yeah.
hey, what's going on? And they're like, did you see the dog? And so it's very clear that it's again his way of solving some kind of plot problem. And there's some people here that are, I think, arguing about who has final say. And I do want to clarify that if Nojima puts his foot down on anything, there has been statements that say that we let him do that. But I still don't think that necessarily encapsulate what his role is in the project. He's not just like on set all day, telling
Yeah.
people what to do. But he's a good problem solver, and I think there's a really good video that Last Elixir put out that explains how Nojima came in and essentially solved the plot problem of Rebirth, of I'm sorry, of Final Fantasy VII with Zack, with the inclusion of Zack. And so when I think about the way that he responds to that question with the stamp answer, it reminds me very much of his, sudden inclusion of Zack as a way to solve the problem of Final Fantasy VII's plot problem. So, and I think that a lot of people, do consider Zack to be an analogy, at least symbolically, for Stamp as well. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the connection, first of all, between Stamp and Zack is obviously there. Zack the puppy. I think you spoke a lot about the letters that Eris was writing and so on, and how Stamp was already mentioned there. Um, so I believe so. In order to explain how I think about stamp, I would just start by explaining how I think the words, maybe the worlds work. I believe that the worlds are possibly a byproduct of the consciousnesses or the identities of Cloud and Zack being confused at the moment. So in the original, we only see it from one layer, which is Cloud thinks he was a first class soldier and puts himself in kind of situations where Zack was, and I think you and I agree that he has his memories, and we spoke about this on Twitter as well. Um, Whereas here, I believe this might have been expanded to show you that I don't know exactly how it's going to unfold, but within levels of unconscious, that identity crisis or that kind of confusion between the two identities is being presented through the dream worlds. That being said, I do think that Aerith's role is pretty big there because there's just too many Aerith connections to just ignore, right? My dream, and then all the connections with Kyrie, as you said the other day, with Biggs and so on. So it's kind of very easy we can't really discard Aerith's role there. I think she's
Mm-hmm.
at the very least a facilitator of whatever process is happening in order to retrieve the real version of events or the real Cloud and so on. And so I don't think they're all happening within Cloud's head. I think they might be happening through the live stream, but I do think they serve the purpose of getting Cloud to understand what really happened and who he is. So this is my understanding of the dream worlds. The reason I say that is because if I look at the arc of Zack within the entirety of Rebirth, and a lot of people complained about the fact that he didn't serve any purpose other than saving maybe Aerith at the beginning. You could argue that that was crucial to her getting the white materia to Cloud, so that's already one function he did. The other big one is actually helping Cloud at the edge of creation. So you think about the entire arc of Zack when it comes to actual events, not the message he carries, which is different. He only achieved a couple of things, and helping Cloud was a big one there, right? Um, I think the distinction between Cloud having a Buster Sword or not having the Buster Sword in the Dream Date is a pretty big detail once again, because Cloud not having the Buster Sword essentially means that he did not return to Midgar with it. And so that kind of challenges the memories that we have. And so I just think that it's a very metaphysical way to present how dreams tend to talk to talk to one's conscious in order to resurface repressed memories. And so it leads us to Stamp. I think first of all, the white dog is definitely supposed to represent Cloud. That is way too big for me to ignore. Is the white dog with a bandaged left hand being carried by the black Chihuahua that is
I have to
kind of similar to right.
I have to stop you. So, are you saying that Glenn is Cloud's dad?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Refu, I believe, would maybe be represented by Glenn and so on, and so that's just leads us to the other white dog, which would be Cloud. But I definitely think that that is a reference to Cloud and Zack. The stamp poster, so just so that everyone knows what we're talking about, is the stamp poster that appears in one of these dream worlds where the black Chihuahua is carrying the white dog,
Mm-hmm.
with its bandaged left hand once again, left paw. I feel that the stamp models or designs, breeds differ in behavior or in their character, right? In how, for example, I'm not very good in dog breeds, but I've read a little bit about it in order to understand maybe why there are some differences. There are 7 big dog breed groups according to so common definitions, but I don't think they match entirely with possibly the 7 we have, by the way. But for example, if you compare a German Shepherd with a Labrador, the only difference would really be behavior, other than obviously how they look, right? So they are very different in how they behave. How, for example, how easy they will follow commands, or how much running they will need, how active they are, for example, this kind of stuff. And I think that links or that mirrors what the dreams are supposed to convey about the identity and how the personality of each one of the characters is built. So if we were to presume that the black Chihuahua is supposed to represent some sort of connection to Zack, I think the white dog is supposed to represent that the real Cloud is still not with us. This is how I understand that poster, because that is an unconscious white dog being carried by the personality of Zach. This is how I understood it. What does the terrier represent then? So this is where it becomes tricky, because then you have a lot of variations and you need to kind of have to map all of them to a specific personality. I have not managed to find a one-to-one mapping of each one of the dog breeds. What I will say is that the terrier for me would be almost a combination between Cloud and Zach if I was to really be forced to put something on it. And then it leads us to the Beagle stamp, which I strongly believe is much more connected to the stamp that Sephiroth has on whatever identity is being portrayed. And that would explain why it appears in the first soldier of all entries. But I'm aware the logic doesn't hold for worlds number 6 and number 7, by the way, just to be total, to get that out of the way, so
Yeah.
that I don't get clipped by Ectogamut saying I figured it out for the first 5 and not for the other 2. I don't think I figured it out, but I think there is some sort of identity, personality, nature to why the stamp models are the way they are.
Fair enough. Okay. You're wrong, but that's okay. You know, you're allowed to be wrong. It's just timelines. No, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's you know, like we got it's another thing too, because we got I don't want to say surprisingly little amount, but much less uh from the Ultimania um for Rebirth than we did with the remake Ultimania. Um
Yeah.
you know, the remake Ultimania leaned heavily into like all of the questions, you know, like why can Aerith see the future? Why, you know, um, why, why are these creatures manifesting? You know, and Numura talking about there being four forms of Sephiroth, etc. Um, you know, like there's a bunch of weird stuff that it really draws attention to mystery box wise, and then when we get to the Rebirth Ultimania, it basically says that you know, it has something to do with Zack's choice. That's really it. You know,
Yeah.
even though that doesn't like necessarily align. You know, and there
Yeah.
are some logical consistencies with that, and to the point where I asked, you know, Hamaguchi to his face about that, you know, uh, and he responded that, well, that was a different timeline, you know, and that was when he used the timeline, that was the timeline phrase, and that was funny. Um, and so, you know, the other thing, yeah, and I'm not 100% on what stamp is. I do think that it's obviously very symbolic of soldier, of loyalty, and I think it will have a, you know, a mechanical implication that you know, indicates uh, you know, something involving narrator, and
Yeah.
so I think we can all agree on that, and I think that is very thematically appropriate for Final Fantasy VII in general. But I also think that, you know, people get hung up on how powerful that is. Like if um, you know, people I think have a tendency to, you know, apply these psycho spiritual labels to it to separate it from Western timeline talk, mostly to take power away from it. But I think something that we always have to remember is that in this world, you know, the live stream is what
Yeah.
makes materia. You know, I mean, like the reason that the planet is you know, in peril is because, you know, of a black materia. You know, so the live stream and all of these esoteric things have a impact on the narrative in a very permanent and real way. And I think that gets, you know, that gets shoved aside a lot because people want this to be more of a rug pull or a red herring, um and I think that that's what I like the most about your most recent video is that um you know, again, we're acknowledging that maybe we're asking the wrong questions here. You know, like this is not, you know, like how it ends is up to how the writers want it to end. You know, the mechanics along the way, all of that stuff can be can can be deus ex into whatever they need it to be. So instead,
Yeah.
what are they trying to tell us with these mechanics? What do these mechanics represent thematically? That's a more interesting question right now. And that's what I really enjoyed about that. So, something you said very early on in our talk was you said you really doubt that Hamaguchi wasn't aware of something that Kitase said. You know,
Yeah.
hold on, I'm sorry. Well, it's possible that the chupacabra might get me anytime now, but if so, it's been great. It's been great if I die. Um, but anyways, uh, a lot of people have said that maybe they've changed their mind on the way things are going, and did the devs change their mind? And here's what I'm gonna say is that I think to some extent there has been variations in the way that they were going to tell the story they wanted to tell. Some details that may be
Yeah.
changed. And I'm not sure. It sounds like you weren't around for this, but the game, the version of the game that I played was a month before release, and I couldn't help but notice that there was a terrier stamp in Junon and in the gold
Yeah.
saucer, and uh, there was uncertainty, and this is as early as the remake Ultimania, as to whether or not there would be 3 titles or 2. They had not decided at the end of remake whether or not they were going to make 2 or 3 games, right? So just from a
Yeah.
structural perspective, you can't say that they've always had everything figured out. Game design just doesn't work that way. That's insane, especially with games this long. That's literally too much to ask. Um, I do think though that they probably had an idea how they wanted to end things, like a pretty solid idea of how they wanted to end things. But um, so I don't know if there's a chance that maybe, just maybe, part of the reason there's some um, discrepancy between what the devs have said now versus then has to do with the fact that this is that the game development is hard and a process. You know, um, do you have any thoughts on this as a topic overall?
Um, I I will have thoughts on it, but rather from a, how do the mysteries, or how does the story change in terms of how it's being conveyed, as you said. I feel that that is a much safer thing for me to say that they have changed their mind about, rather than the ending or direction. I totally agree with you. I don't think they waited for the end of remake to really decide what the overall direction of the trilogy would be, because what they introduced in remake was disruptive enough that it needed a payoff regardless of what the feedback was going to be. So they were so far ahead in terms of making changes or suggesting that we could have changes, that them just waiting for feedback was not going to bail them out. They need to have an actual direction and an actual logic to it. Um, in a more direct fashion, could the stamp mix-ups have to do with the structure of the games? I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Especially that if this was just 2 games, then possibly we would get the resolution of whatever was going to happen with the stamp, or whatever the stamp designs mean in the second game, if that was going to be the last one. So I think that it's possible that some of the assets, I do remember that they were initially planning to use the Terrier model for the entire world we were going to play in as Cloud and Party in Rebirth. So I don't actually know what to make of that, but if that was already a change that they were planning or they were considering, this means that the design differences would not be recognizable to characters, because I don't imagine that Barrett would stand there outside of Midgar and say, hey, inside Midgar it was a beagle, now it's a terrier, what's going on with this, right? I don't think that's ever even going to be acknowledged.
Yeah.
But it just tells me something about the nature of reality and the way they were imagining it. It means that they were maybe thinking that the nature of reality would completely change once we crossed into the outskirts of Midgar. So what does that really mean for the story? Did we enter another world? You know, it could go in a lot of different directions. I don't think they changed their mind, to be totally honest, to answer the question in a more straightforward manner. I think the way the story is being told, I even expect Revelation to have some changes in the way the story is told compared to Rebirth. The one thing that is prompting me to say this now is maybe the trailer. As I said earlier, it's very, very OG coded. It's kind of a very different to what we got before for Rebirth and Remake, certainly. So I wouldn't be surprised if the way they tell the story is even safer, quote unquote, in Revelation, and we only get the big info dump towards the end. It'll be interesting to see, but that's what I expect for part 3. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I actually think it'll be the wildest overall, but I do still think that we'll get all the stuff. I think
Yeah.
it'll start the weirdest.
Certainly.
I think it'll start weirder than Rebirth. And
Oh wow.
I think we'll also get a demo that skips the prologue in the same way that we got with Rebirth. I'm not sure if you were aware of that. I know you played it late, but
Yeah.
that was the weirdest thing.
Yeah.
Is everybody we didn't know that when you actually bought the retail game there was a different prologue. You know, there is an
Yeah.
additional
That was
prologue,
awesome.
and that was a really cool thing that they did. And I hope they do something like that too. Um, um, I have a good question from Sunny, and it is question for both. How do you both feel about the idea of these new elements in Re-Trilogy using OG as a meta tool to tell a more is more story of Final Fantasy VII? Puts OG and new fans on the same playing field. Um, I don't
That is
I don't I think that like on a very simple level that's true. You know, that we are on a similar playing field. Um, but I don't know if that it really I don't know if it worked, you know, and I think we're gonna have to see the end of the project to really feel if that worked. Um, you know, because I do think it's generally more people that played the original that are discussing um you know this kind of stuff and having this kind of discourse. I really do feel like the meta elements are you know a different conversation overall that they're having with not just I mean I guess with mostly OG fans, yeah. So I don't think we're on the same playing field. I think that you know one of the interesting things I'm doing is I'm having my doctor wife play. She'll be playing tomorrow. You know the remake series and um and her experience is going to be so different, you know, than mine, and it
yeah.
already is showing as being different, you know, and so they want us to have different experiences, I think. um
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I echo that. And we spoke about it before, but my wife also played recently Remake and Rebirth as someone who doesn't play a lot of video games.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the new players do have some advantages over us in terms of not complicating things and looking at what the story tells and not beyond. So when we have lines from Sephiroth, which are supposed to be cryptic, for example, they read them for what they are rather than trying to read between the lines, which we tend to do, understandably. Um, to answer the question, I think maybe one of the purposes of the meta plot is to put us on the same level, but I don't think it's in the same kind of confusion. So the same
Yeah.
level of not knowing where the story will end or how it's going, but I don't think it's this. I don't think we're intrigued by the same mysteries, so to speak. I
Yeah.
think we as OG players are very much looking at the meta plot as the one mystery of what's going on, whereas new players still have all the Nibelheim stuff to resolve and so on. So we're intrigued at the same level, but by different things, I would
Yeah.
say.
um Steed, what else from you? This is from Straight Yoga Bo. What else from your research into Yogacara do you feel like could give us clues to the message the devs want us to walk away with at the end? Now, if I
Oh, wow,
recall
that is,
correctly, you're not super into Yogacara yet, right?
yeah,
Okay.
not as much as Jungian psychology for sure. This is not to say that I am an expert in Jungian psychology
Sure.
either. I'm just researching these topics as we go. I think Subtext is doing a great job talking about Yogacara recently. By the way, he just spoke about it in one of the streams, and
Yeah.
I think he's got some great ideas. So I don't want to. A lot of what I will say will probably be just some inspiration. Sorry, from that. What I understand about Yogacara is just the subjectivity of reality and how it relates to the dream worlds or the concept of reality in remake to begin with. If I were to summarize it from what I saw, is that your experiences, your memories, your what you are and what you lived through shape how you perceive the same element. So if I were to present information, the same information to persons A and B, they would see it differently dependent on on who they are and what their experiences are through life and so on. Um, and I certainly think that there could be commentary that you could find in Final Fantasy VII about that, just between the life or world views of Aerith and Sephiroth, for example. They view the solution to the planet's crisis completely differently, despite supposedly having the same level of knowledge.
Yeah.
So if we presume that they both have access to future knowledge, be it within the live stream in the OG time span or in the future, then they have come to different conclusions based on the same level of information. There is also commentary within the first soldier where you see that Angeal comments a lot about how we make the reality we live in, that by changing and looking inwards we can affect the world outside. What I understand by that is that we have to change and we have to work on ourselves to be able to perceive the world the right way or to change how we perceive the world. This is how I understood it. But there is also commentary about how his childhood and that of Sephiroth have conditioned them to react completely differently to the same events. So, for example, when they are exposed to Masamune, when they are in the ruins of Robio and so on, they both get exposed to the whatever the whispers or the spirits, let's just call them that for now, are trying to do there. And they both react completely differently. Angeal kind of snaps out of that, whereas Sephiroth is essentially just compelled to go and get the sword, right? Just as an example. So I do think that plays a role. Will it play a role in the actual mechanics of the dream worlds? I don't know. I think you could argue that, and again, I'm not going to steal this from Subtext Video, but you could argue that there is some stuff within Cloud's experience or perception today that can be, connected to that. And Cloud's current perception is based on certain things. And so to get Cloud to really change how he perceives the world will imply an internal and an introspective work and a lot of work from the story to get him there. And I think that's how it connects, possibly.
Okay, fair
But
enough.
again, I'm not a big,
Yeah,
yeah,
and I'm excited about Subtext Yogacara video. You know, the other thing too is that Yogacara and Jungian psychology are both really big subjects, and um, to the point where when you throw them out and there's you know scholastic or scholarly uh, perspectives on it, it probably gets us away from what Nojima meant. Did I lose you? Did I
yeah.
lose everybody? Oh wow.
No, I'm still hearing you fine. Not sure about the stream.
Oh. Can you guys hear us? Huh. It still says live. Okay. But it's just not
Yeah, I
showing
think
on
so.
mine. Okay. Well, whatever.
Yeah.
Um anyways, Anyways, it's frozen on my screen, but you hear us, and I don't know if you see us. It's fine. Um, what I will say is that oh, with scholarly versions of this, it's probably going to be very different from what Nojima knows about these topics. I'm not saying he isn't well learned or well read, but uh, pop pop psychology Yogacara is very different, or uh, pop spiritualism Yogacara is generally more used to describe something closer to positive psychology. This idea where you can manifest your dreams. Um, that
Yeah.
your perception of things defines reality, and that the relationship between your perception of something and the something is much more intermeshed than maybe like a Western view of things. But in a more scholarly setting, Yogacara is just it's more like a modality that helps us describe perspective and observational bias, observational differences. The nature of things. It's a way to describe how the conscious mind um, would interact with like the storehouse, spiritual storehouse, etc. And so there's I'm sure when he said that he meant it, in good faith, but it seems unlikely that you know heavy practitioners of either of those things are going to be able to use it to tell us anything. My immediate read on the statement had more to do with Zach. I was like, okay, so this has to do with the way Zach is interacting with, this fragmented and dying life stream. Like his
Yeah.
choices, his dreams are having these impacts, um, on stuff, uh, and the collective unconscious is just the live stream. And I've not only had that connection made before to me, about the live stream and collective unconscious. um it it happened early enough in my scholarly journey that um i would I would visualize the live stream, when studying collective unconscious. Like, and so it's very, it seems like a very just, I don't know, simple label for the way that we're
Yeah.
describing it. And but we already know from that at some level, um uh, the will of the planet manifests in things like materia and magic and summons and stuff like that. So it isn't really hard to run with any of these. But the problem again with these is like, oh, I could guess, the outcome. Is no, you couldn't, because once you introduce positive psychology, then instead you could just say we can use this set of loosely connected, thought systems to justify any decision we make. And you and I have talked
Yeah.
about this before, the Deus Ex problem. um but I'm again, I think I'm feeling comfortable enough with, the thing that kind of made me feel like, oh, they're gonna do this in a stable way, is Hamaguchi's remarks. Like, I really think that he's got a really strong sense that um we don't want to take anything from people, um and but we're going to try and add things. And we know that it might create a Final Fantasy VII experience that's different from FF7 OG plus the compilation for you, but it will be this new additional thing that's got all of that stuff in it somehow, and might surprise you along the way. And I think the place it most likely will surprise us, and where Yogacara will come in the most, is going to be the resolution of whatever the meta plot is and how that affects the ending. So
Yeah.
that's my answer. um,
Yeah.
Okay, we got 10 more minutes if there's some other questions. Okay, yeah. Do you think Sephiroth will come in and mess with Cloud and Tifa in a live stream sequence? And
Oh,
who's going to help Tifa and Cloud in that scene?
well, that's kind of a rhetorical question
Well,
that I don't think.
that's hard, right?
Yeah.
Because you know, because the level at which he does in the OG is the most
Mhm.
kind of I don't want to say it's the most hands-on, but it's like an echo of what we see like all throughout the remake project. So, I mean, um is now the time where they kind of peel back on that and let that scene really
Yeah.
breathe between us, or what?
It's actually a great question because you need to explain it mechanically as well. If you don't have Sephiroth involved in the live stream sequence, you actually need to explain why he's not able to do this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas he's literally whispering in Cloud's ear in Remake and Rebirth. I'm waiting, Cloud, and you hear him all the time. So how is he able? And that might have to do with what Zack and Aerith have been doing all along through the Dream Worlds. That might be how that resolves that plot. It's because we're trying to isolate Sephiroth from Cloud. I don't know if that would be satisfactory for everyone, including myself, but it
Yeah.
might be one of the results of that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and
But
he does mess
those,
with
yeah,
Cloud in the live stream already in Rebirth, does he? I mean, he messes with everybody. He messes with
yeah,
Aerith in the Dream Worlds. He stabs the weapon when Tifa's inside it during her version of the live stream sequence. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, seeing him in Gongaga is actually a great indicator that we need some sort of ground rules as to why he would appear in Gongaga but not appear in the actual live stream sequence.
yeah, yeah. It's tough because that is easily the most sacred scene. You know, I think right now, anyways, it's the one that most people want. Like, don't mess this up. You know, like Aerith's death was already very
Yeah,
divisive, you know, and so yeah, it's a good question. My answer is I think he'll be involved more, but not in a tasteless way, not in a tasteless degree. Is my direct answer to the
hmm,
question. Uh,
yeah.
okay, do you have any questions for me?
For you,
Yeah, you, Steve.
so what is the last shot of Final Fantasy VII Revelation for you? If you were to just take a wild guess right now,
I still think it's the 500 years later. I
that's interesting because it
Yeah,
goes back to what happens in the meantime, right?
yeah. Yeah, I think that the ending is you know, the ending is different uh other than that. But I think that is definitely the last shot still.
That is such a strong stance.
Well, how about you?
I admire it because, yeah. Um, I don't. I think I'm also on the same boat. I think it would be that scene, but I think it might be a little bit more interactive this time around, in the sense of it's not just the cutscene. Maybe Nanaki narrates something to his cubs. Maybe
Hmm.
we actually get to do that
We run up to it.
small cutscene playing as Nanaki. Yeah,
Oh man. That'd be fun if we
um,
played as one of his kids, just in it. He got blonde hair. Nanaki named him Cloud.
that would be awesome.
Yeah.
That would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Yeah.
I like
What
that.
happens in the meantime is, yeah,
Okay,
is obviously something different.
okay. So, what scene are you most looking forward to that is likely to be there? This first part of this question. This is
Um
my final question, and then the second final question is, um, actually before I ask that, Drumjod asked a really good question. So we're gonna do that, and then we'll ask the final question here. Is there any way that the anti-remake folks will ever find any satisfaction by the end of Revelation?
Um, what what do you mean by anti-remake, folks? Is it people who think it's a sequel or who want a different ending, or?
No, I think Drumjod probably means like the Sebbies.
Oh, okay, people who hate the remake. Yeah, okay. Oh, um, I think some of them are too far gone,
Yeah,
if I'm being totally honest. But I do think that people who have lost interest, discreetly lost interest without making a fuss about it for after remake or rebirth, might come back once Revelation is done if they hear good things about it.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. So there are people that are lost, and there are people that have made their identity disliking it, and for them, the only thing that's going to change their lives is like, um, therapy, some kind of bizarre experience, like they get sober or something, or they have like, they like
Yeah.
survive cancer or something like that. Like one of those like I'm not being mean. I'm saying like to have that kind of life, like perspective change, it's very hard and rare, and people just don't do it, unless something dramatic happens in their life. So I don't think that's going to happen for that. But I think you're right. I think there's this whole market of fence sitters that, um, have, uh, maybe even some of the less discreet ones. Like I'm going to give the best example is Night Sky Prince. Like he was so
Hmm.
negative on remake, and then he was so positive on rebirth. And from the discussion we had last, he's probably going to be more positive on Revelation than I am. Like he expects less from it, needs less from it. And I think there's a lot of people like that, and we did see like,
Yeah.
look, the same set of critics that gave remake an 87 gave it a 92 once it got to rebirth, and so people, like there, I think most people, can have like a change of mind, and there were critics on there
Yeah.
that were like that rated remake 60 but rebirth, 90, so that
Yeah.
happens. It's a thing that can happen for normal adult folks. um but when you look at anti-remake people that make that their identity, that's their identity, and an identity
Yeah.
shift, requires falling into the live stream, and I don't see that as like a real thing that happens, unfortunately. um
Definitely.
so, okay, back to my final question, and then we'll call it after this. And once again, thank you so much. So, first part of the question: what is one thing that you really want to see that we can expect to reasonably be in part three in Revelation? And what is one thing that you hope to see that is not at all guaranteed?
Ooh. I was actually going to answer about the first one, but I'm going to leave my answer for the first one to the second question because it makes
Okay,
more sense. I am definitely looking forward to the live stream sequence. Is kind of the boring answer,
yeah,
quote unquote. I am looking forward to. I'm going to keep it simple. I'm just looking forward to what the background looks like in the live stream sequence in 2027 remake. It's you build this image of something in your mind and it stays there, and it stays for so long, and that's the expectation. But then I don't know how to imagine the live stream sequence. I don't know what the live stream sequence is going to look like aesthetically, and I'm really excited for that, other than the events and the emotional, the catharsis moment. Second question, the answer might be a bit more interesting, is something that is not guaranteed. I would love to get a Cloud Zach full on conversation. I want the reason I'm saying this is because I feel that Cloud and Zach spent so little time compared to what Zach represents for Cloud and what they represent for each other. And so I feel, and that's actually a theme with Cloud, is that he spent so little time compared to the amount of importance that some people have in his life. And I want Cloud in general just to have enough time and and space to do that closure, that conversation with everyone he
mm,
wants, especially Zach. And if it's Aerith as well, yeah, I'm not gonna say no to that. But for me, it's more importantly Zach.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. What is yours?
Well, I have to change it every week because otherwise it would be boring. So expected thing that that we're for sure gonna see. Um, I am super excited to see whatever happens with the sapphire weapon. Um,
Hmm.
the dodging the shot was the one major deviation they showed, and it was
Yeah.
very exciting. And I feel like people are underreacting to it, but that's okay. Um, so I am excited to see the sapphire weapon sequence. Um, Wild swing, thing that I don't necessarily expect but want to. I would really, really like to see Chadley full blown, like Raiden and MGS4 level redemption. Like us just be like, so I just want the internet to collectively apologize when like Chadley like sacrifices himself, like, you know, like, oh, well, in order to really save the planet, I cannot be technology that depends upon its use. I and like
Oh my god, that makes so much sense.
make this decision to like, protect the planet and and like sacrifice himself, and his last little bit of live stream soul is like the little thing. It's like the little bit of live stream that finally pushes into the meteor, and the meteor dissolves over Midgar. Like his soul and you know all the memories that we gave him, over a million lifetimes of Chadley. I want everybody to just be like, oh, screw Aerith's death, Team Chadley. You know, that's what I want.
I guarantee you there will be a faction of people who don't like that Chadley has that much importance in one of the most important shots.
Yeah,
I would
no,
love it.
I know. Well, they got to justify Chadley. I think I do actually think Chadley's going to get some kind of redemption, but it's not guaranteed.
Yeah.
The thing that I don't think is going to happen is I don't think he's going to be like secret. Like he's a sus little dude. Don't get me wrong, but I think I think he's going to just be like yet again another example of how like all of this world's uh experimentation, the soldier project, misuse of resources, selfishness, how it affects all these different characters and how all of them get to respond and fight against it in their own way. And I think why that's so important is to yet again create a world that is a foil that chooses differently than all the than the one victim that's causing this the most, and that's Sephiroth. I think it is to justify Sephiroth of all things not getting a redemption arc. And I know that's rough, but I think it is really kind of one of the like core messages of the game. It's why they're foils for each other. Why the there's the Musashi style duel, and why there's why the characters are foils of each other is this
Yeah.
is the planet choosing like, hey, strife is difficult, but we get to respond with love and community and not dominance, and that's I think how Final Fantasy VII still tackles things like good and evil while being compassionate, and so I think Chadley is an opportunity to yet again, um, tell a different side of that story. And I think that's what they're doing with it. But, who knows? It could be some other level of betrayal, but I doubt it. And
Yeah.
with that, is there any closing thoughts you have for the fandom?
Well, I always say this in my videos. I think that what unites us in this journey is much bigger than what divides us. Like people believe
Mm-hmm.
it's a remake, it's a sequel, shipping camps, factions, whatever. We all like we're experiencing this thing that is a one in a lifetime kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing that not every franchise gets its full HD remake, 4K remake, blah blah blah. So
Mm-hmm.
I would love for us to embrace that, to focus on that a little bit more. I love the excitement around Revelation when it was announced, so I would love to see a little bit more of that. And you know, it falls on me as well to do that. I'm not saying this from the outside. I'm including myself in that. So that's what I would say to the fandom, and what I would say to you is thank you so much for doing this. And
Mm-hmm.
you've been absolutely incredible to me from the first day when we started interacting on Twitter. You've I feel like you've even, you know, you've kind of defended me or had my back on a couple of rough interactions online, which I
Mm-hmm.
really appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
And for having me on, and yeah, for giving me a chance to talk about this thing that I love, and
Yeah.
for whatever, for the way you do it continuously. Really appreciate it.
And I really appreciate you. And I look forward to doing this more. Like, I love having this. This is
Yeah.
so cool. And you're right. We are really lucky to have, like, I cherish, you know, these last 7 years, and the community experiences I've had some bad ones too. And, but for the most part, everything that they've done has helped me create community and opportunity, and I'm really grateful. And you're part of that now, and I'm